Good morning once again. Dobre ráno. And welcome back to the conference. I hope you all enjoyed the reception last night, and I can see that people started talking to each other and, hugging and greeting in the morning. That's fantastic, because this kind of, the getting to know better and each other and networking, staying in touch, I think that's the core of this kind of face-to-face meeting and conference. That's the beauty of the conference, which we don't have in an online setting. So thanks for doing that. And I hope you had a great evening. Some of you might have enjoyed the extracurricular activities like having good Czech beers or taking a walk in Old Town. So this morning we are entering the day 2 of the conference. And yesterday, of course, we had a very rich series of presentations, exchanges, speeches, interventions, and dialogue with all the colleagues from the ministries, public institutions, civil society, youth, and EU, and others. I hope you had a chance to have a look at the image, this one, created by our colleague from Visual Coach. They put some of the keywords, phrases from the 2 topics that were discussed in the panel: language acquisition for learning and well-being, safe, and welcoming schools. This is really very interesting. So I strongly encourage you to have a look, because it's there on just outside of the room. So this morning, before we enter the theme 3, I wanted to take this moment a little bit of you to share my interpretation or my takeaways. It's not the official summary of the recap of day 1, which is a lot. I know some of you have found some answers to your questions. Some of you have a confirmation of others that that what you are doing is great. Or some of you may have new questions coming up by listening to the others. So this is my version. Let me just share. So first of all, inclusive education, as the title of the conference suggests, we started talking about, of course, we are focusing on the refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Europe. But oftentimes we go beyond that. We talk about children from migrant and foreign backgrounds, most vulnerable children, such as children with disabilities, Roma children, children from the poorest households. Or we talk about diverse groups, just the children who are all different, with different backgrounds, different experiences, different ambitions. So we talk about all children. I think that's the kind of the overall framework of this conference, which dictates our discussions today and yesterday. And these 2 issues, on the top, language acquisition, and the second one is the well-being and mental health. Now, these 2 are really, the key topics. Before the conference, when we start conceptualizing this conference, we picked up many, many topics and issues, and we ended up having those 2. And probably that's, for me, it's great that, many discussions around teachers and families, or support from the government, NGOs, and so on, but they all come together at the end, those 2 core topics. Of course, there are many issues to consider, but those 2 topics are at the core level of our concern. And we heard a lot about whole school approach and the centrality of teachers, teaching assistants, and families in the different community context, and the support measures we have to have should be targeted. That was really encouraging to hear about how we can promote those peer-to-peer learning. What we have been doing in this conference is also peer-to-peer learning, of course, at the country level or the different levels. But within the country, there are many good examples, lessons, experiences to share. And that's something we have to really promote within each country context. And, of course, education does not operate in a vacuum. It's set within the broader context of social and economic development. So you need to look at the different aspects and different needs of a child and a family through the intersectoral collaboration, not only the Ministry of Education does everything, but we have to work with others. Not only, again, ministries, we have to work with civil society, private sector, diplomatic communities, UN agencies, EU, and so on, and academia. And we need to take care of the housing, employment, leisure activities beyond education, but that, because they all affect the education and learning of the children. And I also like that the people talked about the national level, municipality level, and also community level synergy. And evidence was one of the key topics we heard many times yesterday, to generate the evidence and using the evidence for better informed policies and programs. For us to do so, we need to do a good research. We need to document what we have done, what worked, what didn't work, what are the lessons and what are the failures. And capturing the voices of children and young people is so important, so important. I know you are doing a lot. We have done some. And I think that's, again, is always for us to, it's a reality check. What we think would be good for them may not be good for them. We need to keep listening to them, keep getting their feedback. So we are very happy to have yesterday the young people to be with us. And diversity as the norm rather than the exception. You know, we heard about this multilingualism, interculturalism, heritage language, and culture. We will hear more today. And this is the MTB, MLE. So we often talk about the mother tongue-based multilingual education. And there's a broader body of evidence that the children learn in their languages, will have better learning outcomes in the target language and other subjects as well. So we need to start looking at this, looking at the acquisition of the learning in the host community, but also how you can strengthen, how you can maintain and strengthen their heritage, culture, language, and history, and so on, in different contexts. And last but not least, this is my own reflection. So there's a lot of room for us, me being a UNICEF staff, to think about how we can support this process as a UN body, together with partners like the European Union, and also our country offices, our refugee response offices, our regional office, how we can facilitate further this type of exchanges. Not necessarily, again, face-to-face conference, but we can do it online, specific topics and focused discussions, or bilateral communication between two countries, and so on and so forth. So that's a kind of recap from my point of view to share. And on that note, I'd like to move on to today's topic. And theme 3 is about continuous and flexible learning pathways in Europe. We talked about how each host community in Ukraine can ensure the continuity, smooth and continuous, undisrupted learning experiences for all children. And we are going to hear from European Union and a few country colleagues who have perhaps more and longer and different diverse experiences in the inclusion of children from different backgrounds. So let me hand over to Carolina to moderate this session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Aki. Welcome to day 2 of the conference. Before I invite our distinguished speakers, I just want to say that after the 4 presentations that we will hear, we'll have a Q&A session again. And we encourage you to use Slido. Yes, here we have the QR code, which you can use during their speech already. The questions can be either in English or Czech. If you cannot decide which language to use, please use English so that I do not have to translate. But feel free, of course, to ask in Czech as well. We'll manage. So you can use the Slido QR code. I just want to note that there's also an overview site in Slido where you can do the voting for the questions so that we know your interest in the topics. And please indicate also to whom you want to address the question who should answer, because we'll have 4 presentations, actually 3 speakers. The first one is Ulrike Storost, expert from the European Commission, DG for Education and Culture.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope you have had a good night's sleep and are refreshed. Yes, I see people smiling. Thank you, Aki, also for the recap from yesterday. I think it's really an amazing stock taking that you have enabled us and that we continue today. And yeah, I see my task here this morning maybe to put it into the framework of the regional cooperation. And I have 2 parts of my presentation. One is the outlining what the European education area is about and actually how this is kind of a scaffold or a framework that enabled us 2 years ago when the war broke out to really react very quickly and in which we then built our policy response. So that's the second part of my, my presentation. Maybe just briefly on the European education area, it builds actually on decades of cooperation in education among EU member states on a voluntary basis. The idea is really to identify focus areas for this current decade in 2021 to 2030, where member states can help each other with reforms, with exchange of good practice, also with measuring progress. And the first focus area of collaboration, as you can see here, really focuses on inclusion. So inclusive education has a very, very strong role in this framework of the European education area. It's also, there are actually 7 strategic framework EU-level targets, and I mentioned here 3 of them, the ones that are particularly relevant to early childhood education, which is the first one, the early childhood education attendance. There's, and the next 2 are actually related to school education. So the idea is that by 2030, the percentage of low achieving pupils, 15-year-olds, is going down. And the percentage of early school leavers is less than 9% as well. We see some upward convergence in the early childhood education and care attendance, and also with the early school leavers. We have a very deeply rooted, persistent challenge actually in equity and in the low achievements, which unfortunately the latest PISA results actually have shown that we are rather moving away from the target. So there's really a lot to be done on this field. And it very much points actually to the need to focus more on inclusive education. And I have here a brand new chart that was just published as part of our analysis of the PISA data on the share of the students with a migrant background and their underachievement in mathematics. It's based on the latest PISA data. And it takes into account all the EU member states where actually the share of migrant students is more than 5%. And this is the second and first generation of students combined. So basically it's split here into the underachievement rate of the non-migrant students, which is this little bar. And you can see that actually for most of the countries, the underachievement of these students is basically much, much less, so in a way better, than those of the students that were born abroad, so first generations, or even for those native-born students where the parents were born abroad, so second generation. There are a few where this gap is not, a few countries where this gap is not as large as for the others. So, for example, Estonia, Croatia, Ireland, Cyprus, for different reasons. We don't have the possibility to go into the details here, but I think this really warrants a closer look on closer analysis as well to see why this gap is, on average, so large. Some of, I think also, the organizers also have asked me to give just a brief outlook. How does the European education area actually work? How is it governed? So basically we have the council, where the ministries of education meet regularly. We have the education committee that meets throughout the year in Brussels. And this open method of cooperation is really core. We have the high-level group, different director general formations where the director generals for schools, for example, meet. And just last week there was a meeting, Markus was there from Austria, where they also visit, for example, the inclusive education is a very important cross-versal topic where they then also look at schools and how actually good practices are being implemented. And this happens very much also in expert groups. We have expert groups on every level of education, where there's at least one representative from each EU member state, also from the EEA countries and candidate countries. So this is, I would say, maybe the backbone of our cooperation, where we really organize peer learning activities. We ask the ministries on which particular topic they would want to work. So we have one expert group on school education, where really this inclusive education is the core. But inclusive education is very broad, so what is it exactly that we want to work about? So we focused on blended learning, now we focus on special educational needs, targeted support. So really we go into in-depth and we organize peer learning, recommendations, etc., jointly with the ministries of education. And there are two transversal groups. The one on equality and values in education is also very, very relevant and has actually in the past already worked a lot on good practices for migrant integration. Oops. We have more than 40 initiatives to achieve the European education area, and these two are just examples. They are the core pillars, I would say, for inclusive education. One is the council recommendation called Pathways to School Success, really meaning school success for all, and the expert group on promoting supportive learning environments and well-being at school. And we saw it already yesterday. It's really one doesn't go without the other. Maybe that's one of the core messages that we promote also. You see here there are fact sheets available. We spoke yesterday about bullying, what can schools actually do, social and emotional learning. So all this you find on the internet, and I put some of the links in the final presentation so you can look it up afterwards and find the resources. But the key principle, I think, that I want to stress under Pathways to School Success is that achievement and basic skills cannot be achieved without well-being at school. I think this really goes hand in hand, and that is a core new approach, we would say, a new policy framework that we promote under the Pathways to School Success. So to put it very bluntly, it's not enough that children remain in school, which was for years the focus, this early school leaving target, but they also need to feel well at school. Otherwise, they will not achieve the competences and the basic learning that they actually need to succeed in society. And this, unfortunately, PISA has been a very, very strong reminder of this. You see the whole school approach, so we speak the same language. It is also a very, very crucial principle in all our documents. I spoke about resources that we develop. I want to mention a few examples here. We have a European toolkit for schools, which is actually embedded in our online platforms, in the European School Education Platform. It consists of screened practices. We have a board of experts that really look into practices promoting school success, inclusion, and well-being from all the EU member states, sometimes also beyond. We regularly offer webinars that are really targeted at teachers. So that's one possibility for teachers to get the training courses. We heard yesterday as well that training is very important, and there's a lot of self-paced courses, webinar recordings, even if they don't, cannot attend at a certain hour, videos, practice videos that can be found. And just as an example, I digged a bit in the toolkit, and maybe you have come across one or the other of these practices. There are also a lot of them are targeting migrants and refugees. And for example, here I found these 3 projects that are particularly focusing on the psychosocial support that show how, for example, how the voice of the child can be made better heard in school, how teachers can be equipped. I think this ICAM project is very much also offering ready-made teacher training modules, or how schools can actually be promoted as safe zones. This is this Refugees Well Schools project. And just here you see this compendium of inspiring practices that is from one of the experts group on values and equity, where you find a wealth of more materials. That is what we had already and what we could build in 2022. So the European education area, I see it basically really as the scaffold or the framework which enabled the EU member states to work together when the huge influx of displaced children from Ukraine started in 2022. Within very few weeks, you remember, it was really unprecedented in scale. And we found a high diversity of situations across the EU. We saw it also yesterday, and in a way, maybe there was also the positive side of the situation was that there was a lot of experience that we could build on and that member states could exchange. So already in March, end of March 2022, we started with very flexible, short, 1 hour meetings in the framework of the European education area. You saw the expert groups, so all the expert groups actually met under the, it was basically, the idea was to create a European education solidarity group for Ukraine, which actually met in the different formations. So all those that are dealing with early childhood education and care had dedicated meetings to Ukraine. Those that were dealing already with inclusive education in the working group on schools, they met, I think, at least 8 times in April and May, and on different topics. So we had a really series of peer learning exchanges. How do you find the teachers among the refugees? How do you use EU funds, etc.? And this enabled the member states to really make this, I think, also these tremendous efforts that they made to respond very, very quickly. The Temporary Protection Directive, of course, gave the legal safety that the displaced children had immediate access to education in the EU under the same conditions as the nationals. And I think this was what Adrienne already mentioned. We mobilized all the tools that we had at our disposals: the peer learning, policy guidance, online platforms, funding, and the data collection. I want to zoom in the remaining time on the policy guidance and the funding tools. This was the guidance that, with the help of UNICEF, thanks a lot, UNHCR, and UNESCO, and also our experts. We have an expert network on the social dimension of education and training. And based on all the peer learning exchanges that we had from March, April, May in 2022, in June we published this guidance document, which brings together all the knowledge that the member states actually had also gathered in the years before. And it builds very much on this idea. And I think I can just summarize again, you know, it's not only about learning needs, it's really about the social needs and the emotional needs of the new arrivals that need to be met in order for educational integration to be successful. We published 6 chapters, and I present them very briefly. They give, let's say, a wealth of recommendations, guidance, and also good practices on the different areas, from reception to the long-term inclusion. So the first chapter is really about making sure that all children have a place in the host country schools, which was a big, big challenge, especially in countries that really faced a huge influx in a very short time, where we said, okay, digital education can be in the first time a solution, but it's not a long-term solution. It's really, what is really important is that children have this direct exposure to their peers, precisely because school is more than just learning. It's really this social and emotional place where children can connect, can feel accepted and safe. And it's not only about creating the infrastructure, it's also, but you all know this, it's having the staff that comes now in the next chapter. It's preparing the schools and the teachers that are there. I think all the ministries of education were very, very fast in having a website with first guidance. What do you do on the first day? You put the name of the new arriving child so that they feel on the blackboard, so that they really feel that they are here and they are now in the classroom, and this is where they belong. But of course, there were also more teachers needed, and we really encourage member states to find also the staff and the teachers. There were actually many among those that were fleeing from Ukraine, and how could they quickly be mobilized to actually be enabled to teach, despite the fact that in many countries the teaching profession is protected and has it's very strictly regulated. So basically there was an exchange of practices. How do you identify? We also worked together with Ukraine to see, how do you identify? There's a database. How do you get the qualifications that the refugees might not have brought along? But this turned out to be a lesser problem. The bigger problem was the language barrier, of course. So sometimes countries waived the requirement. They enabled, for example, specialized contracts or assistant staff. And that's maybe something I want to say. We need to encourage still now 2 years later to pursue also the formal recognition of the teaching profession, of those that are working as assistants. Because a year later, last year in April 2023, we made an analysis of what actually happened with the teachers from the Ukrainian refugees that are now working as assistants. And there is a risk that they remain trapped in these entry-level positions, or assistant positions rather. And that is something that I think that there's still work to be done to keep these teachers engaged and motivated, and also recognize the fully use of the qualifications that they have. The third chapter we touched upon largely yesterday, so it's really core, psychosocial support, language support. Engaging with the displaced families and helping children maintain the link with Ukraine is not only informing them proactively. We heard about the hotline yesterday. That's, of course, a very good practice, but also enabling, or the use of the material, that the very good online material on Ukrainian language, how that can be used actually in the schools. If you have good practices on this, we know, for example, Sweden is doing very well with mother tongue tuition that ultimately benefits all migrants and refugees with another mother tongue. But how this can actually, what emerges from the Ukrainian displaced children, how this can benefit other children, that would be very interesting for us. We see individual schools that have bilingual models, but it's not yet in the, let's say, on a big scale. The importance to really move towards inclusive education for all learners closes the circle, and we have a separate chapter on early childhood because it has some specificities due to the non-compulsory nature. Sometimes there are fees, etc., that need to be waived. So that's our policy guidance. I think it's still pretty valid 2 years later. We are, of course, happy to hear how we can improve and what emerges. Again, a lot of resources accompanying these practices. We have made a collection, for example, of Ukrainian teaching materials on the European School Education Platform. Ukraine has now joined eTwinning, which is our peer-to-peer exchange. Maybe I mentioned this because it came out yesterday also very strongly. There's, for example, a group of teachers that work on the inclusion of Ukrainians in their classrooms. In eTwinning, which is kind of a social platform for teachers from Europe and beyond, where they can really easily exchange. We have the platform for adult education, IPALER, and the new Ukrainian school hub, it's called, provides also additional non-formal learning materials. And the EU funding opportunities. Just maybe a word on this. Many of you are always interested. It's Erasmus Plus examples. There's a very flexible use of Erasmus Plus projects for everything that relates Ukraine. It's a transversal priority in Erasmus. I want to promote this call on teacher academies, where the deadline is the 6th of June. It just opened. It's a network, or teacher academies are actually networks of teacher education institutions. So they can, across Europe, there are several countries together where they can, for example, in one transversal strand is inclusion and diversity, they can together develop curricula for initial teacher education. And that is currently open, so if you know of interested initial teacher education institutions, please make them aware of this. We enabled also to have the cohesion policy funding flexibly used under the Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund. And there are other tools, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where we have seen from our colleagues also that some countries are actually using these investments into reforms to promote inclusive education. There's also the Asylum, Migration, Integration Fund that focuses more on the first phase of reception and early integration. The challenge is, of course, to make, let's say, all this coherent to use these funds in a coherent manner. And maybe the technical support instrument is one of them to help countries to really think about strategically also how to build up systems that can absorb and best use these funding opportunities. Yeah, the ongoing work is very much the Ukraine's integration into the European education area framework. So they joined eTwinning, they joined the Eurydice network about information about the European education systems, the working groups. We have now representatives of all the Ukrainians. And we are in close cooperation with the ministry, for example, on the assessment of learning outcomes, where Ukraine issued a ministerial order giving guidance to the schools how to assess the learning outcomes in the EU. We published this and promote this as well in an English version among ministries so that families are actually aware of this. Adrian spoke about the data collection, and all this is also within the framework of an arrangement of cooperation that was signed with the Ministries of Education last year. Support to Ukraine's education system is, of course, the next big step, but I don't have time now to go into this. Maybe just to close the circle, we really hope also that, there's a cross-fertilization of Ukraine's, or the integration of the Ukrainian displaced students into, for example, in school education, can cross-fertilize for other migrant groups. There is the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion that really concerns all migrants, where DG Home Affairs is in the lead and where education is also a big sectoral priority. So very soon we'll have the midterm review of this action plan, and we will closely look into examples. And I think I was very pleased to hear yesterday from, I think, Hungary, Slovakia, and Czechia, examples where you see this cross-fertilization. That's it. Many thanks. I'm happy to take questions after the panel session, and stay in dialogue with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ulrike, for the overview and very interesting and useful examples. And I'd like now to invite Mr. Markus Benesch.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to this conference. And as you see, my family name is Benesch, which means actually that coming to Prague is somehow like coming home a little bit. But it's also maybe the example for that integration is something that Austria is very focusing on, not over the last years actually, but even though maybe about the last centuries. So integration, migration, that's a topic that is with us for a very long time. So I will try to give you an overview about the situation regarding Ukraine and pupils from Ukraine from the perspective of Austria. But in the beginning, I would like to start with some background information regarding Austria as a country. That's statistics about our population. And why do I do this at the beginning of this presentation? Well, as you see, our country has, it's the statistic of 2 years old, but by about we have now reached 9 million people. But the fact is actually that right now a quarter of our population in Austria has a migration background. You can differ it between first and second generation, but never though we have a lot of people from abroad coming to Austria. from the European Union. And of course, then you have some certain regions, as Vienna, for instance, we have reached 50% right now, who have a migration background. That's also, of course, of the European Union. It's because of the fact that a lot of infrastructure connections also within Eastern and Central European countries have been reinstated over the last 25 to 30 years. But it's also, of course, the consequence of all the migration and also the refugee challenges our country has faced over the last 30 years. And there, yeah, getting used to crisis along our borders. I want to start with something, Balkan Wars, 1991 to 1999, and even 2000. We were extremely strongly affected by it. There were hundreds of thousands of people coming from the countries to Austria, and many settled. For instance, today, it is said that Vienna is the third largest Serbian city. We have by about 200,000 people with a Serbian background living in Vienna, being part of the society, but it also shows the dynamism over the last 25 to 30 years. Then 2015, which is something that was even a bigger challenge for us, or is right now a bigger challenge, because we are talking about all the refugees coming from Syria, from Afghanistan, Iran, and these countries during these very, very challenging times, and it is something which we are still dealing with in Austria, and especially my Ministry of Education. And of course, we had the situation now starting in 2022. That's a picture of our central station in Vienna, where a lot of people from Ukraine arrived, and there were organized information points by some NGOs, which did a great job in supporting the institutions. So, and one more thing I would address at this point, actually, that's the refugees which have been coming to Austria within some time over the years 2015 and 2017. Well, and when you just take these 3 years, we are talking about 155,000 people. When I was in the train yesterday to Prague, I came along in Pardubice, and well, I took a look on Wikipedia, and I realized that that's 1.5 size the population of Pardubice coming to Austria, and especially to the urban region of Vienna over the period of 1.5, maybe 2 years. And that's a kind of challenge which was very, very big, and is very, very big for our country to, yeah, not only settling them, not only providing social services, but starting the process of integration of into labor market, into the educational system, but also into society and culture. When I take another group of Ukrainians, and we have now by about 83,000 people from Ukraine, I've just taken a look on some comparisons, actually some other countries. I realized yesterday once again that especially the countries of Eastern Europe are strongly affected, and in a way than our country. But nevertheless, it is quite challenging for us, having had the crisis of 2015 and 2016, having now once again a very big group of people coming to Austria. Oh, sorry. But there are also some differences. I have taken this kind of data, which shows that actually 2/3 of the migrants from Ukraine who came to Austria are female, and they came with their children. And that's something completely different to the situation of 2015 and 16, which also maybe has a stronger impact on our educational system than the crisis of 2015 and 16 had on the education system, even though we have other challenges. And I tried now to make some sort of a comparison between the two crises. It's sometimes you say it's not there are differences, but there are also some similarities. First of all, there is the amount of people. But in 2015 and 16, there were by about 80 to 85% male refugees. In many cases, they were just young, but they were not more obliged to go to school. Now the majority are migrants from Ukraine with female migrants and also with their children coming. The war in Syria started by 2011, and I do remember myself that we started discussing the impact on Europe in 2014. And so there was a situation, actually, the war had ravaged the country, it had ravaged all kinds of structure existing there. So the state structures had eroded. And in the case of Ukraine, for instance, it is different because the war started in 2022 and the country has been attacked or is under attack. But the state is still functioning and is trying to do a lot to cooperate with us. In case of 2015 and 16, we had no kind of cooperation with Syria, with Afghanistan, with all these countries of refugees. That's a difference. And in this situation right now, it's also an advantage. The majority of the refugees was not required to go to schools because they were older ones. We had discussions, sometimes we had to prove again whether they were obliged to go to school because many of them did not even know their age when they came to Austria. That's now in a more clear situation because we know actually that many of the pupils are required to go to Austrian school based on our national law. And also one big difference is that we had no kind of networks of Syrians or Afghans in Austria during the crisis. And now we had a lot of very important cooperation with Ukrainian institutions, organizations in Austria. I want to mention at this point, for instance, the structures of the churches in Austria, who helped us quite a lot in defining and informing the group of Ukrainian refugees about the obligations, about the structure of our system. And they are also right now partners in, making integration into and inclusion into our educational system possible. So what helped us, or what is still helping us during the crisis of Ukraine? We have experience. That's what I'm emphasizing on. We are not perfect. We make a lot of mistakes regarding integration, but especially during 2015 and 16, we were forced to implement reforms and structures and frameworks and measures for handling this huge amount of people, especially also in the field of integration and also in the field of education. We have I mentioned just one law on integration. We have 2 laws on integration in Austria, which define quite clearly what refugees and migrants from certain states are obliged to do when they want to stay in Austria, consisting of language courses, in some cases also some courses about values and society structure of Austria, labor market, what they are obliged to do. So we have define some objectives which help us now to put the influx of people into some sort of framework where we can help them to integrate into our specific structures. Yeah, as I've said, we have also various programs regarding labor and educational training. We still are in a process where we have these programs started during 2015 and 16, and we had to adapt them for the group of Ukrainians. But we had these programs. Yeah, the demand is still rising, but we not had to invent it at all. Yeah, and also the existing structures within the educational system I will mention afterwards. And of course, as I mentioned before, we have the networks from Ukraine in Austria, and we have a functioning state and partner within the Ukraine government where we try to cooperate on all these issues. Oh, I see, I'm in a hurry. So, facts and figures about the Ukrainian pupils in Austria. At this point, we have about 13,000 pupils at all, and primary schools and secondary education, actually, that's the big group of pupils. We have by about nearly 9,000 pupils in these schools, which is the biggest challenge at all. And that's also the difference to 2015-16. When we take a look on our gymnasium, higher education within the school system, we have quite a lot of pupils actually there, which is a very positive development, because higher education was something we did not have during 2015 and 16 in the group of refugees coming from Syria and Afghanistan because of the situation there. And we are still now also in a situation where many of these pupils start to take their finals in Austria. They take the Matura successfully and are allowed now to study also in Austria if they want to after taking their finals. Once again, some numbers regarding primary. As you see, we have some specific vocational training schools, polytechnical schools, and the amount of people there is not as high, but it's also a positive development. So the attendance regarding those who are obliged by our law is by about, and thank you for the input yesterday about it, I added this kind of sheet. The attendance of those pupils who are obliged to go to Austrian schools is nearly 96%, and those at all of the group of pupils in Austria is by about 80%. We do have the situation that we had to create for the group not obliged to go to school some special programs, and I will mention them. So the first objectives during the first months of the crisis were attendance. We had this kind of discussion, and we had to convince the parents and the people coming with the children that they go to our schools, not only because of education, but also because of the fact that school is a social environment. Yeah, it's a place actually where the pupils maybe have the chance to come along with this very difficult situation. There was a lot of conviction we had to do, but in the beginning we had a rather low rate, but in beginning of the new school year, our government, in accordance with the Embassy of Ukraine and all the institutions, we insisted on that all the pupils from Ukraine who, based on our national law, are obliged to go to school, to our schools. And of course, if possible, the issue of distance learning. We also fully support within our structures the distance learning, if possible, if it can be combined with our curricula. But we say we need to get them into kind of structure, and the structure we know, as many other European countries, is our educational system. But if it is possible to combine it with our partners in the Ukraine and all the distance learning, it's fine for us. Well, and it's about language. The one thing, actually, and it's a highly emotional discussion in Austria, is the so-called German support classes. That was a structure that had been implemented in Austria in 2018 as a consequence of the crisis of 2015 and 16. When you are in Austria and when you go to school and the teachers find out that the pupil is not able to speak properly in the German language, the pupil is defined as a non-ordinary pupil, which means actually that the school itself and the pupil itself, they get additional funding. The school gets additional personal funding, resources for supporting the language learning and also the integration. And we defined that when you have at a school 8 pupils who are defined as non-ordinary pupils, by law, you are obliged to install this kind of German classes, which means actually that the pupils are part of the normal class. They attend sports, they attend arts, they all the activities, but the focus actually is on learning the German language. I also say right now there's an ongoing discussion that's hugely emotional issue in Austria, but I'm convinced of we need a structure, we need a kind of orientation for the people to focus on. And we did quite a lot over the last years to make the system a little bit more flexible regarding when you can make the tests for switching from the German class back into the normal class all the time. But also when you are in the normal class, actually, you get some additional training in German language. What we see right now is actually that the demand for these kind of classes was huge, and it was also something, this automatism existing in Austria, that helped us during the beginning of the Ukrainian war and the influx of new pupils, because we had the amount of pupils in schools, so the school had automatically to install these kind of classes. And without this kind of automatism, even those who were skeptical about the concept of German classes said, without this kind of automatism, we would not have been able to get along with this huge influx of pupils with a very short period of time. Also something, hiring teachers from Ukraine. We also had a program there for hiring teachers from Ukraine coming to Austria as assistant teachers. I said they're very special contracts. I do remember quite well when we were discussing with our legal experts how to create a framework for them to be enrolled in the educational system, but nevertheless we found a way that we were able to hire these teachers, and they were a huge support for our system and our integration process. And there are also some other things we did, and this now is the group of pupils of not compulsory school age. We had the situation they were not obliged to go to school by law, and we were not as good as informed about the fact whether they have some sort of different education, what is about distance learning, and so we made an offer to them. It's a concept of some landing classes. It's a concept of giving them orientation within the Austrian system of education, what they can do. And it was a class being defined, having an own curricula. We had some experiences again during 2015 and 16, and then reinstated these kind of classes in 2022. So 27 hours per week. Of course, German, English, math, and giving them an orientation where they can go to, and also the obligation that when they go into these classes, we have to find for them some other education, some other training, vocational training, whatever, after finishing these classes. That worked out quite well. The system is still installed in demand in Austria, and I suppose we will need it also over the next years. But it was also something we were able to offer to the people from, or the pupils from Ukraine, which were not obliged to go to our schools. Yeah, also of course information and something, video interpretation. We do have a program actually where you can book over an online service some time with translators. We installed this program as a consequence again of migration even before. We had it installed, and when war started in 2022, we were able to adapt it by raising the amount of hours offered in Ukraine and Russian, and it also helped us to bridge the gap regarding translation and issues of communication, which is also quite important for the teachers in the schools, but also for the parents and who are there. We have the so-called in Vienna Ukrainian Saturday School, which we support, which is also some additional offer to the pupils from Ukraine to have some kind of connection also to the educational system. And of course we have other services. Yeah, one other thing also quite important was the fact that we provided and equipped all the pupils in a certain age from Ukraine with devices. We have installed a program in Austria which actually was a consequence of Corona, that all pupils in the age of 10 years in Austria do get a device. Laptop, tablet, computer at all. So we had to scale up this program. We had to adapt it actually. We had some cooperations with partners from industry and economy who also gave computers to us, but it helped us to equip all the Ukrainian pupils which came to Austria during the school year with the proper infrastructure they need. And of course also content, the issue of war, the fact that in Austria actually we do have a lot of groups of migrants within schools, made it necessary for us to create new curricula, new content for addressing war, the conflict, also in classes. I just want to remember again that we all have groups from other countries of Europe in our schools, and we have to do everything there that conflicts existing are not imported into classes. And because of this, this was also a focus of our work. And of course, psychological support, even though, and that's something not fascinating, interesting for me to see, we also had scaled up the what we have on supportive systems, but the demand by the group of Ukrainians was not as high as we had expected, but nevertheless we have some kind of additional support for them in the field. Challenges. Duration of the war. We have something that is the same all across Europe. They are reflecting about their prospects of returning. They even now have the opportunity of taking their finals in Austria. maybe starting some kind of labor career in Austria. That's something that many are dealing with. Relations between different groups of migrants. We had in some various, not many cases, but we had some cases where we had some conflicts, for instance, between pupils from Serbia, with a Serbian background, and Ukraine. Because Serbia, as we know, has some kind of connection and common sense with Russia. It were not many cases, but it was an issue. We also had a very interesting situation that some NGOs criticized us for doing all the things for the Ukrainians, but not doing the same things in 2015 and 16 for Syrians and Afghans. Also in a very aggressive way. I was quite surprised in some situations. When I said, yeah, it was learning by doing. Some things we started in 2015 were a consequence of the crisis, and we are now building on it up. So, but also there's some kind of criticism, ongoing criticism by some groups. They say they get some things we didn't get. Why do we get it? Why don't we get it? And that's rather challenging. Then opinion about the war in Ukraine and in Austria, it's, I think, in many European countries an issue. But in our country, as a neutral country as a whole, also the attitude and the willingness that there should be some peace. And it also has some kind of psychological or cultural impact on work in schools. And of course, the ongoing integration into labor market and education. We now see, actually, as I've said before, we have many pupils in our primary schools, which means actually they will have some higher education in Austria. And of course, there are still challenges regarding labor, language, and integration into the educational systems. But we have to take the basis of what Chancellor Angela Merkel once said, as all over Europe, we have to make it. We have no choice. We are in the situation right now. We have to deal with it. And yeah, that's maybe the not optimistic but realistic approach I'm emphasizing on. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Markus, for sharing experience from Austria. We need to improvise a bit at this point. We were also looking forward to experience from Germany, but Mr. Mostafa Boklu unfortunately could not attend in the end due to family emergency. He was very keen to present, but he shared the very interesting PowerPoint presentation with us. So Aki will share some key points from his presentation. And I would like to mention, because there are questions about this, that of course we will also share all PowerPoint presentations with you. And there will be a recording also shared. Aki, floor is yours.
Thank you, Carolina, and it's me again, sorry. It's not always very easy to present someone's slides without any knowledge about it, but I found it very important to introduce and share with you, so to enrich our discussion. So please bear with me, 5 minutes. So it's about supporting educational biographies of migrant and refugee pupils in the German school system. Maybe German speakers can help me. I asked Mr. Mustafa, what is biographies of here? And he said something about time spent in school. Is Bildungsbiography something? Yeah, you're nodding, but the people are not. Let me try. So I just highlighted some yellow. So they have a declaration in the government on the integration of the young migrants and refugees that gives them a framework of the language and the integration of the migrants and the refugees into school systems. That's come from October 2016. So perhaps, again, with the previous crisis. And legal aspects, so he referred to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Again, of course, we know that the Article 28 and 29 talk about every child's access, rights to education and learning. And this is really important because that's the international convention which we all ratified, most of us. And the compulsory school, again, then applies to all children, irrespective of where they're coming from. And he is saying that in the school year 2 years ago, 14% of the student population had a foreign citizenship. And in the region he works, North Rhine-Westphalia, 40% of the student population had a migrant background. So it's very similar to what Markus has just presented from Austria. And again, 60% of those migrant student population come from a different European countries. So it's a really diverse classroom. So if you go to a classroom as a teacher, then you see so many kids speaking in different languages. In some contexts, it's not new, but for most of us, it's super new, including Japan. It's really amazing, and to see the very quick changes in the demography, and those, the cross-border migration, not only about refugees, but in the world. So October 2015, they estimated additional 300,000 pupils visiting, and then 2022, after the war in Ukraine, another 250,000 pupils joined them. So this is the same statistics. So talking about language acquisition, again, so I see a very similar model to the Austria, and perhaps to a few other countries. So there's a differentiated model depending on the proficiency level of the German language. From the differentiated model, semi-integrated and integrated model. And then, again, he's emphasizing the support measures to integrate schools, the pupils into the regular school system, going beyond language, obviously, by working with the social worker, psychologist, and the cooperation between school and home. I think this is really key. We know that we try to do it, but it's not probably sufficient in many contexts. So how do we do that in a systemic manner is perhaps something we need to consider together across the board, government, civil society, and us. And yeah, again, it's this key issue of heritage language classes come up as the biographies, so the time they spend in the school system and education and life, their identities and natural or mother tongue skills in the context of integration. So in that context of heritage language in his region, they have a policy of integration offering 30 different languages in school with the teachers who have those language command in addition to German. And his point of emphasis is about multilingualism as a vehicle to learn German as well as any other new foreign language. So again, I think that we are hearing very similar arguments about multilingualism in the classrooms as a way to true integration and inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sorry. Just want to draw your attention again to the website where we have the bios of the speakers. We don't introduce them in detail to save time, but please refer to the website. And I don't have to introduce the next speaker, Judith Hollenweger-Haskell, whom you actually know from yesterday's panel discussion, professor from Zurich University.
I will not give you the statistics of Switzerland. I think you can guess, and I would rather, how do I do this? Yep. Rather try to give you an overview of what we kind of learned in Switzerland from developing a curriculum for all, which of course works for any child, even the child with most severe disabilities, which is something actually I'm surprised we haven't spoken about in these 2 days. What happens to the Ukrainian children with disabilities, because they were the most vulnerable ones, and therefore probably their parents or their mothers took them out as a first priority. So it might be interesting to talk about that. but what we learned from how to expand the curriculum in a way so that it fits all children, rather than narrowing it, which is a little bit what we heard yesterday. They first have to learn the Czech language, which of course means narrowing the curriculum. And I would like to, say a few words about opening it up. We just heard about the children's rights. All children have the right to education, and I'm sure you're aware how that translates into access, participation, and achievement. We've spoken a lot about access so far. How do we get children into the education system? Do we place them in special classes? Do we place them right in a regular class? We heard about the infrastructure that is given to them. So all of this is really about access. We spoke yesterday about participation, well-being, building relationships, feeling well in the classroom, in the community where the children are. And then we have not spoken so much about the last one, about achievements. And I want to emphasize here the word meaningful learning outcomes. And meaningful, of course, means meaningful to the child. And if they're planning to return to Ukraine, like as the next thing that they're developing their visions around, then learning the Czech language may not be their the most motivating thing. So it's about building this vision. And I would like to introduce you shortly to a kind of way of thinking that might help understanding the current situation of the child, then building a vision based on that, and based on that vision actually develop learning pathways. So this will be my objective for the next 9 minutes and 56 seconds that I still have. So it's referred to as the landscape model of learning. And it's, and of course there are different concepts. It doesn't need to be this, but what's really special about it is that you're taking the perspective of the child. The two previous speakers have taken very much the perspective of the system. First, what the European Union does, and then what Germany does, Austria, sorry. And then Germany, the presentation switched around a little bit, focusing more on the biographies of children and taking them into account. So I would like to really encourage you now to take the perspective of the child, because first of all, it's relation building. Second of all, you can really understand their ecosystem, which is the first concept in this way of thinking, because they may not see the same thing in the environment that they're in as you may see. So it's a very personal way of looking at the situation they're in, their identity. What does this disruption, of learning mean to them personally? Do they see it as an opportunity? Do they see it as a threat? Do they see it as an adventure? Do they see it as a tragedy? And all of this is very important to take into account. So, so you're just kind of trying to establish what's actually in their reach. So this would also be the social capital that they bring with them. And yeah, so I think you get the sense of what I mean here. And then the second concept in this landscape model of learning is the horizon. So you may be looking this way, like the Swiss officials think that about 2/3 of the Ukrainian refugees will return. So they're looking at this horizon, but the child may look at a very different horizon, maybe of becoming an artist or returning home and rebuilding the relationships. So it's important to understand in which direction are they actually looking, what is their horizon, how far ahead. Are they just worried about what's happening the next day, or are they beyond that? So it's very important to understand that. And only once you have a good understanding of their ecosystem, of their horizon, then can you start to understand the pathway that possibly could lead towards what they want to achieve. Or you can work on the horizon that maybe, you know, you should also consider this or whatever. And I used ChatGPT to develop this little illustration. And that's something that I would also like to promote, to think broader than the classroom, to think of different spaces where learning can take place. And I think this is the focus of the session that we actually have now. So what can you do in order to achieve that? I'm a very strong supporter of the idea of co-creation. So it's not the teacher developing the goals for the child or the vision of where they should go, but actually do it together, because then there is ownership, there is shared responsibility, it's part of vision building. And feedback, and you probably know this term of feedback, feed up and feed forward. There are terms used by John Hattie, and probably you've heard of John Hattie, with all his indicators that are important for learning. So its feedback is very much about creating knowledge about the current situation, exploring the ecosystem. You could say assessment of learning, of the learning that took place so far. Then we have the feed up, which is this enabling vision. So you're looking far ahead, where do we want to go? And this would be assessment for learning. So you're doing a kind of assessment, vision building for learning. And then the feed forward would be the pathway. So now I'm here, there I want to go. Which first steps do I actually take? So the continuity of learning is very important, and I would just like to encourage you all to think across physical spaces, use digital spaces, social learning spaces, help the children to support these multiple learning spaces. We spoke about peer counseling and psychological support already, learning coaches. I think all of that is well known, but I think what would really help at this point to the children is to get a kind of narrative, a kind of story that they can incorporate, that they can build on, that you can remind them on. And this is just one method that you could choose. I'm a very strong believer in visualization, because it helps really to understand a common understanding. And it helps also to integrate all the tools, the guidelines, and we've heard this morning the European Union has, the Council of Europe, OECD, UNICEF, UNESCO, they all built these toolboxes, but how do you integrate it? And I hope that this way of thinking will help. So maybe a child will just make a long loop, you know, through the Czech Republic or through Switzerland, but then they actually go back to Ukraine, or maybe there are two ways of going. So it's very helpful for the visualization. And for me personally, it's also important to ask not the question what they should learn, but to really talk to the students about why they should learn it, because that's where the motivation is, that's where you can really also raise their interest in learning. And I believe that you should start with the long-term perspective and then build on develop mid-term goals, and then from there you can develop your so-called SMART goals as short-term goals, which I believe are very stupid unless you have this long-term vision. So I leave it at there, and I guess we're going to have a question and answer period now, and then we can explore maybe the one or the other thing a little bit closer. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Judith. Please stay with us. Yes. Thank you. And I also invite Markus and Ulrike. Wonderful. Let's start with the topics that as we heard them. Let's start with inclusive education as such. There is a question for Ulrike. Are all member states endeavoring to work towards greater inclusion? What differences can be observed?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say there are two answers. The first one is yes. All member states made the commitment. I explained in the European education area that basically inclusive education is one of the transversal focus topics for collaboration that were confirmed by the ministries of education. So the commitment is there. And maybe the second answer is it also depends, of course, on the definitions and the provisions in place to provide inclusive education. We have actually an agency, a European agency, EASNI, European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, that does regular mappings of what does it actually mean to have inclusive education systems. And maybe just one figure, they found out that children that were not in mainstream education range from 0.1% to 7%. Across Europe. So there is a difference actually in the concrete provision, which points to probably different definitions of inclusive educations, and also the belief that maybe the mainstream education cannot always cater for the special needs. And I think this is the core of the issue. So how can we actually work towards this mind shift of teachers and policymakers, that inclusive education means not putting some children with special needs in mainstream settings where they're then not catered for, but basically that everybody has special needs in the sense that everybody actually has different challenges and talents, and that schools are becoming increasingly heterogeneous, and teachers need to deal with this and actually believe that they can also. I think yesterday somebody mentioned it's a belief first and foremost that this is possible rather than the concrete provision of trainings, etc. And this change of mind shift, I think that is something that we need to achieve by showing that it is possible across Europe. Voila, I think that's my reply.
Thank you. There are questions coming for Judith, which fit here nicely. Judith, is the co-creation landscape model meant to be applied individually to each child, or are there ways to integrate this approach in a classroom, school?
Thanks for this question. We actually in Switzerland are working with a model that's based on the ecosystem model from Bronfenbrenner, and we thought of this vision building at every level. So individually with the family and the child, then with regard to specific support for individual children, but then it's very important that this is integrated and built into a vision which concerns all children who learn together. And so I think both applies, and I think this model can be used, or this way of thinking can be used to do that also with the classroom, and actually it's done, and it goes a little bit into what you were saying, Ulrike, that you have to have the change of mindset, and the change of mindset only comes about if you are able to think of this open future and to cross the own boundaries that students and teachers have of what you can actually learn. And that's why this vision building is so important, also to help build a growth mindset, which I think is key to higher expectations, both on the student side, the parent side, and the teacher's side.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, your presentation was of great interest for the audience, because there are not only questions but also words of appreciations coming, including heart emoticons. Many thanks, Judith. One of them, amazing presentation and river of life. Who would be able to do this with children? You already answered.
Yeah, I mean, we actually had a project in the city of Zurich, and it was also with migrant parents, to explain mainly why their children needed special support because they don't understand the education system. So together with the school psychologists, the therapists, and the teachers, we actually developed a series of visualizations that they're using now to talk to children and parents about what it means to have, for example, speech therapy. Does it mean I'm sick and I'm never going to achieve? You know, people have this kind of ideas if they don't know the education system well. And so this shows, well, this may be just a little longer path that your child is taking. And yeah, okay, now it's working again. But it goes back to the same river, and he can still go to university. And so parents are many times worried about this long-term perspective, but they're dealing with it by saying, my child has to have this and this grade, you know, and confronting the teacher. And it helps them to actually open up this long-term perspective. And everybody relaxes, which of course is very important for the child to be able to learn.
Thank you. A very much discussed topic also yesterday mainly was the language. So one question about that, Markus. What is the assessment of the child's language support needs based on? Do schools perform language diagnostics of all children?
Well, actually, for making this kind of assessment possible, we do have certain instruments also implemented into our educational system over the last years, on the basis that all the schools have to work on the basis of these instruments, so creating the same preconditions for everybody. That has been also part of creating these German support classes and all the kind of support in language learning. Additionally, we also have some kind of support regarding when you are in the normal class but still have some kind of demand for additional training in the German language, then it is possible to allocate some resources to the class additionally for very personalized training in German language. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Maybe to just add the Swiss situation, we developed, so to say, Lernstandserfassung tool, which is an assessment of learning tool for the German language, and I think it's published on the website of the ministries, and it's used for every child arriving newly, or if they don't speak German at the adequate level. So.
Thank you very much. This will definitely be of great interest for the Czech Ministry and Czech School Inspectorate, which are preparing the assessment to be done for Ukrainian children shortly. Next topic, also very much discussed, well-being. Ulrike, how can we embed support for well-being in contexts or schools that are strapped for providing even basic education?
Well, I think that's a core question, and it's a bit what I also mentioned in the presentation is one doesn't go without the other. So I think it's taking it from the wrong angle to say first we provide basic education, then we care about well-being, because basic education will not happen if the child does not feel welcomed, and if the teacher doesn't feel well, then they will also quit the job if they have the impression that what they do doesn't actually lead to learning outcomes. So it's really taking this broad approach to well-being, having schools that are welcoming, that are putting the well-being of the students and the teachers in the center. I mentioned the expert groups, so we are about to publish. They have started work last year in March, and after 15 months, so this year in June, they will publish recommendations also on how to really and how to really increase the well-being of both groups, student and teachers alike. I think it also there's this multiple tier model by basically you always think about well-being like the most severe cases. Of course you need referral systems and a wider support structure, but well-being in school is also starting from something very basic such as daily routines, saying hello, being happy to see each other, basically having a room where teachers can also have a quiet room, a moment on their own, for example. I think all these are important things that are not that difficult to achieve, even in schools that are indeed, strapped with resources. That's true. But I think the most important thing is that the schools feel that they have the support, and that well-being is not an add-on, but that it's an integral part.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. There are many questions coming, so I checked which are the most popular ones. The one regarding transition course, Markus, has a lot of attention. So through which institution is the course provided in Austria? Are they schools or other institutions, NGOs?
Well, actually the courses are provided by the schools. So if there is a demand, if there is a group of pupils who are interested or keen in taking these courses, these courses were implemented within the school's infrastructure in the school. We also allocated some additional funding for teachers, so that we have the teachers for doing this kind of courses. But nevertheless, we have made a lot of positive experiences with having this program in the field in 2015-16 up to 2018, and then once again starting in 2022. And as far as I know right now, we have to consider whether we will have to adapt the system of these courses for other groups also now coming to Austria. Personally, I would have an interest that it is institutionalized and stays as an additional instrument for integrating pupils and young people into the education system.
Mm-hmm. How long does the course last? Is it for entire school year?
Rather flexible. We are very keen on that the pupils start within the school year these courses, by the way, 3 months, and afterwards can switch into an additional education. But we've seen right now that also from the personal background of the pupils, they said that the demand for taking these courses on a little bit longer, enlarging the time frame, was very important. So in some cases we acted quite flexible, and the courses had by about 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Is it available to every applicant who meets the criteria that you mentioned, and is it available in every region in Austria?
Basically it is available and possible in every region. What we need is some kind of demand noticed by our ministry, by the regional departments for education, and if there's a request, we'll try to address the need.
Mm-hmm. What kind of support can offer school to migrant pupils when there are less than 8 pupils?
Well, the basic principle also in this case is that the focus is on learning the German language. The difference actually is that the training is taking place, or the support is taking place on a more personal, individual level, so that they can take part in the classes and are taken out of some hours of the classes for additional intensive German training. The reason for why we did this kind of concept of German support classes and these additional support courses was that we have such a huge quantity of children in our school system who lack some basic competences in German. In some cases, in Austria, we have schools, primary schools, secondary schools, where you have by about 100% of pupils with migrational background. That would not be the issue. It's not also not the issue that their mother tongue is maybe something different and not German. But when they are not as good as necessary in the German language, the language of communication, then we see that there's a high risk of them losing out to some opportunities offered by the education and labor market. So it's about, from our point of view, it's a question of equality, to focus in the beginning on learning the language, and when you reach at a school a certain amount of pupils who need this kind of support, they also need some sort of structure. That's very, we discussed it yesterday. Implementing some sort of structure is quite vital also for the teachers in the schools, giving them some orientation and some objective what they have to do.
Mm-hmm. One very popular question. Ulrike, any discussion with Ukraine on possibility to maintain refugee teachers on the Ukraine Ministry of Education payroll, or to allow Ukrainian schools to operate in host countries? Are there any discussions like that?
Well, we have regular discussions in the technical hub, which is actually a nice cooperation between the international organizations, UNICEF, OECD, UNESCO, and UNHCR and the European Commission. And we actually invite also from the ministry, or we had the UNESCO, the Ukrainian Institute for Statistics. But I would maybe, this particular question, I would maybe take it to the next panel and ask the Ukrainian representatives here of what they say about this. I think there was a second part of the question about the Ukrainian schools in. I saw that in the EU member states. Yeah. So maybe just to say that, yes, of course, this is fully in the competence of every member state to allow or not the running of schools that are not under their direct supervision in the member state. But we know of a few examples actually of bilingual systems that are actually run under the, for example, in Estonia, they have created a school that offers part of the Estonian curriculum in Ukrainian language under the supervision of the ministry. Or there's also the Schlauschule in München that in Germany that has very long-standing experience with offering bilingual models, and they have now enabled. There was the celebration of the first graduates last year in July that actually had both the German secondary school certificate and the Ukrainian secondary school certificate. So there are these kind of pilot models that are then under the respective ministries of education, which are very interesting and very attractive, of course. But on the Ukrainian schools in EU member states, maybe also the Ukrainian representative can reply in the next panel.
Yeah, let's wait after the break. Another section of questions is around data. Markus, ministries of education often use population data restricted to their nationals for education planning purposes. Do you consider migration trends also for planning purposes?
Now looking back on the Ukrainian situation in the summer of 2022, of course we had to anticipate some sort of trends and some maybe developments, some kind of worst case scenario, best case scenario. And to be honest, we prepared in full knowledge about the situation for a worst case scenario, which meant actually that we really forced the system to scale up the structures and the framework and the kind of instruments available in case that another big influx of Ukrainian pupils is taking place. And trying to anticipate some kind of trends is something we are dealing with actually all the time, but even should it do it even more, because right now, just to mention it, we are now facing a new challenge regarding the family reunion, which is a consequence of the migration crisis in 2015 and 16, so that all the refugees who came to Austria these times are now allowed to bring their families and their children to Austria, which is now a big challenge for our education system just coming up and causing new challenges which are similar to the ones we faced, but on the other hand are something completely new. And also we have to anticipate right now these trends, possible developments right now for the planning procedures, but it's tricky and it's rather challenging.
Are you working together with the Ministry of Interior to monitor, to track refugee families?
Yes, as good as yeah. That's something very, very important for us, that we try to share data regarding some groups of refugees, migrants. That has been very important, especially in the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis. We also cooperated in the field of information, because the Ministry of Interior is also in charge of all the infrastructure regarding refugees. So some basic information about education, which we defined, was provided by the Ministry of Interior.
Thank you. Of course, questions for Judith came later, but I want to save time for them. So what I see here, Judith, what role does the mindset of society play in successful integration? How can we promote a good sense of community?
Now, that's a big question. Well, I think we saw from the discussions yesterday and today that the fact whether society is very multicultural or not obviously makes a difference. And I mean, I must say that in terms of openness, there is a difference towards the Ukrainian refugees than there is for refugees from other countries. So you can call it prejudice. But Ukrainian refugees were welcomed very openly, and so the mindsets may be different for different, populations coming in. So yeah, it does make a difference, but how to change a mindset? By contact. I mean, we see that where there are a lot of migrants in the populations, the Swiss population is very open, and where there are none, they're very closed. So it's, I think, this exposure and interaction and building relationships and understanding each other, which may then change the mindset.
Mm-hmm. And also, Judith, how can we begin to integrate a child-centered vision within the rigid frameworks of educational structures and institutions? Not easy as well.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I just came back from Uzbekistan, and that's the key question that they're asking, because they realize in order to have an equitable and high-quality education system, they have to become more flexible. And if you want to have an inclusive education system, you have to be more flexible. And I mean, that was one of the messages I was trying to give in my short presentation, that you really should think across spaces. And when it comes to inclusive education, physical spaces, digital spaces, social spaces. And as long as you think all children in the same classroom doing the same, lesson at the same time in the same way, it's not going to work. So we developed this kind of model where we ask teachers not only to ask what do I teach and how do I teach it, which is what teachers usually ask themselves, but to say what do I teach it and why do I teach it, and then develop the why first, or the vision or the goal, what do I want to achieve, and then go back and ask, so if I have this goal, what do I really want to teach? And it may then suddenly not be German language anymore, but it may be sports because, or mathematics, because you realize that you can do it also through another subject. And then ask the question, and where am I going to teach this? In which social space will I be able to teach this the best way? And then only then ask the how. So which strategy? So it's like thinking backwards, which I think goes back to the mindset question. So it's really about rethinking the way teachers plan, and then that may help.
Thank you very much. As we are slowly running out of time, and I don't want to shorten the coffee break too much, there are still questions, but if you feel there is some burning question which we missed, please do grab a microphone or ask any question you feel that was not addressed. My colleague is there prepared with the mic. Yeah, can you please ask?
I see the question, which is interesting to all the panelists. Question is, are there any communication campaigns in your countries or in the European context to help raise awareness of those advantages of welcoming migrants, helping changing mindset? Any campaigns?
Thank you. Any of you? Markus.
It has been a campaign not by my ministry primarily. It has been by the integration ministry, which is called Together Austria, which is focusing on showing cases of migrants who are now an integral part of the society, also being a part of a process in the labor market, some best practice examples, and also making these people become multipliers within our school systems, going to schools, especially to schools where you have a high percentage of pupils with a migrational background, telling them that they can make it in Austria if they are keen on and willing on to take some steps and to learn something and try to reach some finals or some kind of education. Trying to give it a positive approach, but that's something that is now taking place for more than 10 years. But we see right now that with each generation and with every new challenge, that is getting more and more important. And even though we should scale up all these kinds of programs right now, but it's at some point a question of funding.
I'm not aware, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, of any specific campaign for Ukrainian refugees. Of course, what we have is in the media very regularly accounts of, in schools, at work, what the situation is and how well they're doing or the problems they're encountering. So we have that, and something that's in the media right now is the supposedly misuse of Roma people of the status, the special protection status in Switzerland. I don't know if this is something that's spoken about in other countries, but it's very much on the agenda in Switzerland, and there is, and I think it's a bit of a problem because people don't like the fact, so they have been found with, bought Ukrainian papers, but they don't speak Ukrainian or Russian. So it's a kind of misuse of the status. And currently, everybody's trying to understand how this should be addressed. Is this a problem or not? So that's what's in the media in Switzerland right now. And of course, it's been a little bit overshadowed by the conflict in Gaza, which has a direct impact on our schools because we have Jewish and Muslim children attending the same classrooms, and I think that's even worse than Serbian and Ukrainian children. So that's been a little bit in the media recently also, more than the situation of the Ukrainian children.
Yeah, well, just to say, we are planning or already started a communication campaign on the European education area this year, but it's focusing really on different examples. One example, and we just published a brochure on successful cases of the use of the Erasmus Plus funding, which is really zooming in. There's one example, for example, of Ukrainian Erasmus Plus students coming back to Vienna that had spent a year of studying in Vienna and that are now teaching as teaching assistants to Ukrainian refugees in Vienna. So they're very, let's say, human, concrete stories of how individuals can make a difference. Yeah, and maybe not as a EU commission, but now as an individual, I read a very interesting interview with film director that is nominated now for the Oscar, the best foreign-speaking film, Das Lehrerzimmer. It's the teaching room, or the teacher's room, and it's basically the son of migrants coming from Turkey to Germany. And he himself considered, I mean, the film itself deals with how migrants are actually, how a teacher tries to integrate migrants in the classroom and the stereotypes that are there. But he himself actually said, I mean, just that this film is being nominated with this thematic now for the Oscar is in itself a promotion of, you know, successful integration. And I was very impressed by this interview, but that's the personal opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question, if need to be asked. We'll have opportunity during the coffee break. Thank you for your understanding, because we need to shorten the break till 11:15. We need to start sharp. Thank you so much to our distinguished speakers. Many thanks. And just one ask from that we got regarding networking during the coffee break or the lunch later. If you want to share your contacts to the cards, you can leave them at the table now. The business card, yeah, so that everyone knows who's here. We cannot share the list due to GDPR, but there was such an ask. So if you want to share business cards or put your contact, there will be the possibility on the table at the coffee break now downstairs. So let me invite you there. Many thanks once again. Thank you.